Egypt, 1520 BC. A world where the sun is not a source of life but an unblinking eye of gold, watching the slow, rhythmic grinding of human souls into the dust. This was a civilization built on the architecture of the self versus the other. The Hebrew people were not just workers. They were the fuel for a machine that demanded monuments as a shield against the abyss. In this landscape, existence was a sentence. The Hebrews lived in a state of perpetual Geworfenheit, thrown into a reality where their bodies were mere tools, extensions of the pharaonic will. Every brick was laid with the sweat of a man whose name would be forgotten before the mortar dried. But there is a dark irony in the pursuit of absolute power. The higher the pyramids rose, the deeper the shadows of paranoia grew in the heart of the empire. The decree to drown the newborn boys was not an act of strength. It was a scream of terror from a god-king who realized that a people who have nothing left to lose are the only ones who can truly end a world. The Nile, the lifeblood of the kingdom, was transformed into a liquid cemetery. Yet, in the middle of this organized cruelty, a mother's desperation creates a crack in the system. She places a basket in the reeds, not as a plan, but as a final, silent protest against a nihilistic fate. Miriam stands in the tall grass, a witness to the exact moment where the shadow of Egypt begins to breathe. But let us dwell here, in the reeds, longer than the official narrative allows. Let us look at Jochebed, the mother, not as a supporting character, but as the first revolutionary of the story. She did not write manifestos. She did not raise armies. She performed the most radical act conceivable in a totalitarian system. She refused to believe that her child's life was a bureaucratic problem to be solved by the state. In a world where Pharaoh had the authority to define who deserved to exist, Jochebed made a counter-declaration with a basket of reeds and a coat of pitch. She said, "This child is not yours. This breath does not belong to your empire." The act of placing Moses in the Nile was not surrender. It was the most audacious form of resistance available to a woman with no weapons, no allies, and no legal recourse. She gambled the most precious thing she possessed against the current of the most powerful river in the known world. And the river, for once, chose the child over the empire. Miriam's role here is equally devastating in its quiet power. She is not a leader yet. She is a girl standing in the water, her sandals sinking into the mud, watching a basket become a vessel of history. She is the witness, and in every great story, the witness carries a burden the protagonist never fully understands. While Moses will grow up to forget the reeds, Miriam will carry the memory of that morning for the rest of her life. It will become the source of her song at the Red Sea and the source of her grief in the desert. The witness is never unaffected by what she sees. The witness pays a price in silence that the hero pays in action. Time is a master of disguise in the halls of the palace. Moses grows up wrapped in the finest linen, his skin scrubbed clean of the scent of slavery, his mind trained in the language of command. He is the ultimate paradox, a Hebrew soul wearing the golden mask of an Egyptian prince. He lives in a state of the in-between. To the world, he is a scion of power. He learns the setup and punch of Egyptian diplomacy, the irony, the sarcasm, the effortless cruelty of those who believe they are divine. But the psyche does not forget. Jung tells us that the shadow we repress eventually finds its way to the surface. Every time Moses walks past the construction sites, his mirror neurons fire. He feels the phantom sting of the whip on his own back. He sees the reflection of his own forgotten ancestors in the hollow eyes of the men carrying the stones. A prince does not bow, his tutors tell him. But his soul is already stooping under the weight of a lie. He is being shaped into a weapon of the empire, but the metal of his spirit is reacting to a different magnetic pole. He is an architect of walls who secretly dreams of doors. He is the predator who realizes he is made of the same flesh as the prey. The tension is building toward a rupture that no amount of palace ritual can prevent. Consider the education of Moses as a dark curriculum. He was taught astronomy by men who used the stars to predict floods, not to contemplate eternity. He was taught rhetoric by men who used language to justify cruelty, not to speak truth. He was taught military strategy by men who measured victory in bodies, not in the dignity of the living. Every lesson was a layer of lacquer applied over the raw wood of his original soul. And yet wood has memory. Press it, varnish it, shape it into furniture for a king's hall, and still, in the deep grain, it remembers the tree. Moses was being turned into furniture for the pharaonic hall, but the grain of his soul remembered the cry of a mother and the sound of a basket sliding into the water. The palace was his education, the reeds were his truth, and truth, as the ancient sages knew, is not destroyed by being buried. It is only pressurized into something more explosive. The moment Moses kills the Egyptian taskmaster is not a mistake, it is an eruption. It is the moment the mask cracks and the shadow takes the lead. By striking that blow, Moses didn't just end a life, he committed social suicide. He murdered his own future as a ruler of Egypt to embrace the visceral reality of his blood. But the acollimento, the welcoming, he expected from his brothers never comes. Instead, he finds coldness. "Who made you a prince over us?" they ask. It is the ultimate rejection. He is too Hebrew for the palace and too Egyptian for the mud. He is a man without a country, a spirit in exile. This rejection deserves its own psychological autopsy. The enslaved man who watches another enslaved man be rescued does not feel gratitude first. He feels the vertigo of a disrupted order. If Moses can strike an overseer and survive, then the entire calculus of submission upon which the slave's daily survival is built begins to tremble. The other Hebrews question, "Who made you a prince?" is not merely a challenge to Moses' authority. It is a defense mechanism. It is the psyche protecting itself from the terrifying implication of the act. That resistance is possible. That resistance has been possible all along. And if it has always been possible, then every day of submission was a choice, not an inevitability. That realization is too heavy to bear. It is easier to push Moses away than to confront the weight of one's own complicity in the machinery of oppression. Moses did not understand this. He thought he had finally crossed a bridge. What he had actually done was detonate it behind him. He flees into the Midian desert, leaving behind the fine robes and the illusions of control. The desert is the perfect setting for a dark documentary of the soul. It is a place of absolute stripping. No titles, no servants, no applause. Just the wind, the sand, and the terrifying silence of a God who seems to have abandoned the script. For 40 years, he becomes a ghost. He trades the scepter for a shepherd's crook, learning the slow, agonizing pace of a life that has no solution, only survival. In Midian, Moses meets Zipporah. This detail is rarely given the weight it deserves. He meets her at a well, the ancient world's version of a crossroads, where he defends her and her sisters from hostile shepherds. Note the pattern. Moses cannot witness injustice without intervening. Even stripped of his palace identity, even exhausted from exile, even in a foreign land where no one knows his name or his crime, he still moves toward the suffering of others like iron toward a magnet. This is not a learned behavior. This is character in its most elemental form. Zipporah sees this. She brings him home to her father Jethro, and in the quiet domesticity of the Midianite camp, Moses finds something the palace never gave him. A life that belongs to him. Children. Sheep. The smell of cook fires at dusk. The radical normalcy of an ordinary existence. And yet, the ordinary existence is its own kind of prison when you were built for something extraordinary. Moses knows this, even as he tries to forget. The sheep he tends in Midian are patient teachers. They do not ask where he came from or why his eyes sometimes go distant when the wind blows from the west, from the direction of Egypt. They only ask to be led to water. And for 40 years, that is enough. Until it isn't. 40 years of silence can make a man believe he has finally escaped his destiny. Moses is now a man of routine, a man of the earth. But the call is not a choice. It is a mechanical necessity of the universe. He encounters the burning bush, a phenomenon that defies the cynical logic of the palace. It is a fire that burns but does not consume, a symbol of the eternal in a world of decay. The voice from the flames doesn't offer a path to peace. It offers a path to confrontation. "I am who I am," the voice says. It is the rejection of all masks, all idols, all pharaonic pretenses. Moses, the man who once mastered the rhetoric of Hollywood-style royalty, now finds himself stuttering. He has lost the postura of a prince. He is terrified. This is the identification for the audience. We are all Moses at the bush, terrified of the greatness we are asked to carry. He tries to negotiate, to hide behind his flaws, but the fire is indifferent to excuses. The staff in his hand, the simple tool of a shepherd, is transformed. It becomes a sentence. He must return to the heart of the empire, not as a brother, but as a surgeon coming to cut out a cancer. The name that the fire offers, I am who I am, is worth pausing on. In Hebrew, it is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. It is a name that refuses definition, refuses the static certainty of the idol. Every god of Egypt had a function, a department, a portfolio. Ra managed the sun. Osiris managed the dead. Hapi managed the Nile. The divine bureaucracy of Egypt was, at its core, a projection of the human need to control the uncontrollable by giving it a name, a face, and a list of responsibilities. But this voice in the fire refuses the job description. It says, I am the verb, not the noun. I am the process, not the product. I am the becoming, not the arrived. This was cosmically terrifying to a world organized around permanence, around pyramids and stone and the gold that does not tarnish. A god who refuses to be captured in an image, a name, or a temple is a god who cannot be managed, and a god who cannot be managed is the most dangerous entity in the universe. The return to Egypt is a study in opposite stimuli. On one side, Pharaoh, the peak of human ego, a man who believes the tides turn because he commands them. On the other, Moses, a broken old man who speaks for a God that cannot be seen, touched, or bought. When Moses enters the hall, the atmosphere is heavy with the scent of incense and ancient grudges. Pharaoh doesn't see a prophet. He sees a nuisance. He sees a traitor who has returned to disrupt the order of the world. And Pharaoh's response is a classic psychological trigger. He doubles the pain. No more straw, but the same number of bricks. This is the cruelty of the system. It is a dark reality where the victim is punished for the hope of the liberator. The people turn on Moses. This is where the script provides no easy solutions. It welcomes the audience's feeling of despair. Sometimes the first step toward freedom makes the chains feel 10 times heavier. Moses is left standing in the rain of his own people's curses, realizing that to break an empire, he must first allow his own heart to be broken. The dynamic between Moses and Aaron in this moment is a masterclass in the psychology of the reluctant leader and the necessary translator. Moses cannot speak with fluency. Aaron speaks for him. But Aaron also feels the weight of the crowd's despair more acutely than Moses, because Aaron has never left. Aaron spent 40 years in Egypt, not in Midian. He felt the extra bricks. He heard the additional beatings. He carried the shame of a people whose hope arrived and immediately made their lives worse. Moses is armored by his years of desert solitude, by his direct encounter with the fire. Aaron has no such armor. He is the interpreter standing between the infinite and the exhausted, and the infinite is asking for patience that the exhausted cannot afford. This tension will surface again at the foot of Sinai, when Moses has gone too long and Aaron is left alone with the crowd's terror. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. First, the plagues must speak. The first plague was not merely a magical feat. It was a strike at the very mirror neurons of the Egyptian collective consciousness. The Nile was not just water. It was their god, their grocery store, their highway, and their identity. When Moses struck the water and it turned into blood, he wasn't just changing a chemical composition. He was exposing the violence upon which the empire was built. Imagine the sensory horror, the scent of metallic rot filling the marble corridors of the palace, the sound of fish gasping for air in a liquid that had become a grave. This is the setup plus punch of divine irony. Egypt had drowned the Hebrew children in the river, and now the river was returning that blood to their very lips. Pharaoh's magicians attempted to replicate the act. In their narcissism, they thought that being able to create more blood was a sign of power. They didn't realize they were only accelerating their own demise. They weren't solving the problem. They were performing for a dying audience. This is the dark reality of power. It would rather drown in its own reflection than admit it has lost control. The security of the empire was hemorrhaging, and the pharaoh could only watch as his god turned into a corpse. As the plagues progressed, the cinematic noir of Egypt began to crumble. The frogs, the lice, the swarms. It was the systematic deconstruction of Egyptian ma'at, order. The Egyptians were obsessed with purity, with the sterile beauty of their temples. Now they were covered in dust that had turned into parasites. Their skin, once smooth and anointed with oils, was erupting in boils. This is where we, akoler, welcome the audience's fear of the uncontrollable. There is a specific psychological dread in seeing your own body turn against you. Pharaoh remained hardened. In psychological terms, this is a compulsive repetition of the ego. He cannot bend because his entire identity is based on being a non-bending god. The irony here is that the more Pharaoh insisted on his divinity, the more he looked like a common man suffering in the dirt. The opposite stimulus was in full effect. The more he tried to tighten his grip on the Hebrews, the more his own kingdom slipped through his fingers like sand. The livestock died, the crops were shredded by hail, and the economy of the world's superpower was being erased by the breath of a shepherd. It was a masterclass in nihilistic collapse. Each plague must be understood as a theological argument, not merely a supernatural event. Egypt was a civilization of gods, a pantheon carefully designed to explain and control every dimension of reality. The frog was sacred to Heket, goddess of fertility. When frogs overran Egypt in their millions, dying in heaps that rotted in the sun and filled the air with the smell of decay, it was not merely an inconvenience. It was a theological crisis. Their goddess of fertility had become the agent of putrefaction. The cattle plague struck at Apis, the sacred bull, the living embodiment of divine strength. The hail devastated the crops that sustained the temples, the priests, and the elaborate machinery of religious observance. Each plague was a pointed refutation of a specific Egyptian theological claim, a systematic dismantling of the Egyptian worldview, one deity at a time. Moses was not fighting Pharaoh alone. He was fighting an entire cosmology. And he was winning not because his army was stronger, but because his God refused to be one God among many. He refused to take a seat at the Egyptian theological table. He flipped the table. Then came the 9th plague, a darkness so thick it could be touched. In our dark documentary style, we treat this as the ultimate Heideggerian void. For 3 days, the sun, the god Ra, the source of Pharaoh's legitimacy, was simply deleted from the sky. This wasn't just the absence of light. It was the presence of a nothingness that consumed direction, face, and courage. Imagine being trapped in a blackness where you cannot see the person standing next to you. You are alone with your thoughts, your guilt, and the sound of your own heartbeat. This is the shadow work of a whole nation. While the Egyptians sat paralyzed in their own existential terror, the Hebrews had light in their dwellings. This is a profound reflexive moment. The light of the oppressed shines brightest when the oppressor is in the dark. Pharaoh tried to negotiate one last time. Take your people, but leave the cattle. He was still trying to keep a setup for future exploitation. He still wanted a punchline where he won. But Moses, now fully integrated with his purpose, delivered the final blow. Not a hoof shall be left behind. The negotiation was over. The darkness was just a precursor to the final silence. The final night in Egypt was the birth of a ritual born from blood. The instruction was precise, cinematic, and terrifying. Kill a lamb, take the blood, and paint the doorposts. This is the mirror of the soul. The blood that was a curse in the river was now a shield on the door. Inside the houses, the Hebrews ate in haste, sandals on, belts fastened, staffs in hand. They weren't just eating a meal, they were eating a departure. They were validating the trauma of the past while preparing for a future that had no map. The Passover meal is one of the most psychologically sophisticated rituals in the history of human civilization. Consider its architecture. You eat standing up, dressed for travel, as if the departure is already happening even as you sit. You eat the lamb, the animal that Egypt used to sacrifice to its own gods. But you mark your door with its blood, claiming the night for a different story. You eat bitter herbs to remember the bitterness, not to wallow in it, but to integrate it. You eat unleavened bread because there is no time for the slow rise of comfort. The meal is a rehearsal for the life that is about to begin. It is a technology of the self, designed to reprogram the body's relationship to time. You are not a slave waiting for tomorrow. You are already a free person who is in the process of leaving. The Passover is the original act as if, the ancient understanding that the body must practice freedom before the mind can fully believe in it. Outside, the death of the firstborn moved through the streets like a cold wind. It ignored the gold of the palaces and the straw of the huts. It only looked for the sign. The scream that rose from Egypt that night was the sound of 1,000 years of pride breaking all at once. The Pharaoh's son, the heir to a divine throne, was gone. The accolimento here is for the grief of the human condition. Even the enemy's pain is a weight. Moses did not celebrate. He led. He understood that the price of seeing through everything meant seeing the cost of liberation. The Pharaoh finally broke. "Go," he said. It wasn't a gift. It was an eviction. The Hebrews walked out of Egypt as the sun began to rise, not realizing that the Red Sea was waiting to provide the final watery punchline to the empire's joke. Leaving the prison is easy. Leaving the prisoner behind is the true labor. As the Hebrews stood on the edge of the Red Sea, they were caught in a noir nightmare. To their front, an infinite, uncaring wall of water. To their rear, the dust clouds of 600 elite Egyptian chariots. This is the moment of Geworfenheit, thrownness at its most brutal. They were thrown into a choice between a watery grave and a return to the whip. The psychological regression was instant. "Did you bring us here to die because there were no graves in Egypt?" they cried. This is the mirror neuron of trauma. The mind prefers the familiar hell of slavery over the terrifying uncertainty of a new horizon. They were experiencing a collective panic attack. Pharaoh, on the other hand, was fueled by a vengeful irony. He realized that without his slaves, he was a god with no one to worship him. He chased them into the trap of his own obsession. He didn't see a sea. He saw a logistical problem. He was so blinded by his will to power that he couldn't see the universe was about to rewrite the laws of physics just to spite him. Moses stood at the shore, a lonely figure in the wind, a shepherd preparing to guide his flock through the throat of the deep. The parting of the sea was not a magic trick. In our documentary lens, it was a metaphysical rupture. The wind, the ruach, acted as a surgical blade, slicing through the collective fear of the people. Imagine the cinematic scale. 2 walls of water rising like liquid skyscrapers, glowing with the bioluminescence of 1,000 trapped sea creatures. The people walked on dry ground, but the air was thick with the scent of ancient salt and impending judgment. This is the sublime, the terrifying beauty that reminds man of his own insignificance. Every step was a gamble with the shadow. They were walking through the literal heart of the abyss. The Egyptians, driven by a ruthless logic, followed them into the corridor of water. They believed their bronze and their chariots made them masters of the elements. It was the ultimate setup. They entered the sea thinking they were hunters, not realizing they were already the prey. As the last Hebrew foot touched the eastern shore, the punchline of the universe was delivered. The walls of water didn't just fall, they reclaimed their territory. The screams of the world's most powerful army were swallowed by the roar of the ocean. In seconds, the pride of the empire became the silt at the bottom of the sea. The grave was closed. And then, silence. The kind of silence that comes after a sound too large for the human ear to fully process. The Hebrews stood on the eastern shore, their feet wet, their lungs burning with salt air, looking at a sea that had just performed the impossible and was now behaving as if nothing had happened. The water was smooth. The chariots were gone. The army, the most disciplined, best-equipped fighting force in the known world, had been erased in less than a minute. Miriam, who had stood in the reeds as a girl watching a basket carry her brother into uncertainty, now stood on the shore of a different water, a tambourine in her hand, leading the women in a song that had been waiting inside her for 80 years. The song was not composed in that moment. It was released. It had been accumulating since the day she watched the basket float. Every year of bondage, every beating she witnessed, every child she saw thrown into the river, all of it had been compressed into the potential energy of that song. And now, With the sea behind them and the desert ahead, the pressure was released. She sang, and the women sang with her, and the sound of that singing rose over the water and dissipated into a sky that was, for the first time in centuries, indifferent to Pharaoh. The morning after the miracle is the most dangerous time for the soul. The Hebrews stood on the shore, looking at the broken bodies of their oppressors washed up like driftwood. They sang, they danced, but the silence of the desert was already waiting to devour their joy. They had escaped the dark of Egypt only to enter the void of the wilderness. In the desert, there are no solutions, only reflections. This is the Jungian shadow work of a nation. Without the structures of the empire to tell them who they were, they began to hallucinate for the past. The manna, the bread from nowhere, wasn't enough. They wanted the leeks and onions of their bondage. They were too aware of their own hunger, and that awareness became a curse. The golden calf was the ultimate psychological regression. Moses went up to the mountain to face the invisible God, and the people, terrified by the silence, built a visible idol. They needed a God they could control, a God that didn't demand change, only ritual. They created a setup for their own destruction. Moses returned to find his people dancing around a golden reflection of their own insecurity. The tablets of the law were broken, not just by his hands, but by the weight of their own inability to be free. The journey wasn't about a destination. It was about the 40-year process of killing the Egyptian inside them so the human could finally breathe. Survival is a quiet, agonizing labor. After the adrenaline of the Red Sea subsided, the Hebrews were left with the nihilism of the horizon. In Egypt, they had a purpose, even if it was a cruel one. In the desert, they had only the void. This is the part of the documentary where we explore the anatomy of boredom. Heaven rained down manna, a substance that defied the laws of agriculture. It was a setup for a lesson in radical dependence. But the human mind, especially one conditioned by the mirror neurons of trauma, does not handle grace well. They began to loathe the light bread. They missed the leeks and onions. Why? Because the food of Egypt came with a price they understood. The food of God came with a silence they couldn't endure. This is the accoglimento of the script, validating the feeling that sometimes we prefer the certainty of our pain over the mystery of our healing. The desert was not a path to a place. It was a furnace designed to burn away the slave ego. But as the years turned into decades, the sand became a graveyard for an entire generation that was physically free but mentally imprisoned. When Moses ascended Mount Sinai to commune with the invisible, the people below suffered a collective psychotic break. This is the golden calf, the ultimate psychological regression. For 40 days, their setup for order vanished, and the punchline of their fear took over. They demanded a God they could see, a God of gold, a God that didn't demand individuation, but only adoration. By building the calf, they were trying to resurrect the Egypt they carried inside their skulls. It was a desperate attempt to fill the Heideggerian hole in their chests with the shine of a metal idol. When Moses returned, he didn't just see a party, he saw a funeral for their potential. He smashed the stone tablets, the literal code of being, because you cannot give laws to people who are still dancing in their chains. This was the darkest point of the journey. The dark documentary lens shows us a leader who realizes he is not leading a nation, but a hospital of the soul. The punishment of the 40 years was not a divine tantrum. It was a biological necessity. The generation that knew the whip had to die so that the generation that knew only the wind could enter the future. There is a detail in the aftermath of the golden calf that our documentary lens must capture in close-up. Moses goes back up the mountain. He goes back to the fire that broke him open. And he says something remarkable. If you will not forgive these people, blot me out of your book. It is the prayer of a man who has made the suffering of others more important than his own survival. It is the moment where Moses stops being a prophet and becomes something more, an intercessor, a man who places himself between the wrath of the infinite and the smallness of the human. He is not negotiating from a position of power. He is a shepherd standing between a lion and a flock of frightened, foolish sheep, offering his own body as the price of their continuation. The fire does not consume him. The fire listens. This moment, quiet, almost administrative in the text, is the moral center of the entire story. It is the moment that defines what Moses is, underneath all the plagues and the miracles and the burning rhetoric, a man who loves people who are not easy to love. Even in the desert, the will to power never sleeps. We look at the story of Korah, a man who wanted the postura of Moses without the burden of the fire. This is the noir study of envy. Korah argued for a democracy of the holy, but he was really looking for a coup of the ego. The desert doesn't tolerate pretenders. The earth literally opened its mouth to swallow the rebellion. In our documentary, we treat this not as a magic trick, but as the self-destructive nature of chaos. When a community in crisis turns on its own bridge, the ground beneath them becomes unstable. Moses stood there watching the dust settle, realizing that the greatest enemy wasn't the Egyptian army, but the Egyptian heart inside his own friends. He was the roteirista, scriptwriter, of a new nation, but the actors kept trying to rewrite the play into a tragedy. He was tired. The cinematic weight of his loneliness at this point is staggering. He's a man who speaks to the infinite but has no one to talk to at dinner. Korah's rebellion is also a story about the democratization of grievance. Korah was not wrong that the entire congregation was holy. The text itself admits this. He was wrong about what that holiness meant. He interpreted it to mean that everyone deserved the title, the position, the proximity to power. But holiness in the framework of this story is not a title. It is a weight. It is the burden of being the one who absorbs the people's pain and carries it upward, and absorbs the infinite's demands and carries them downward. Moses was not the leader because he was better than Korah. He was the leader because he was willing to stand in the space between two forces that were both, in their own ways, consuming him. Korah wanted the prestige without the price. And the desert, which is nothing if not honest, would not allow the transaction. As the decades passed, the nihilism of the sand produced a new plague: venomous snakes. The people were dying from the inside out, and Moses is told to do something strange, something deeply Jungian: make a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. To be healed, the people had to look at the very thing that was killing them. They had to look at their own shadow. This is the reflexive core of the story. You cannot run from your poison. You must integrate it. You must look at the snake of your own ingratitude, your own violence, your own fear. Those who looked lived. Those who looked away died in the dark. This is the setup plus punch of spiritual psychology. The cure is always hidden in the heart of the wound. The bronze serpent was a mirror neuron exercise. Seeing the externalized representation of their internal pain allowed them to move past it. The bronze serpent is one of the most psychologically compressed symbols in the entire narrative. Consider what it asks of the bitten person. It asks them to stop running, to stop thrashing in panic, to turn around and face the thing that is killing them, not to fight it, not to argue with it, not to deny it, but simply to look at it. The act of looking is itself the medicine. In Jungian terms, this is the integration of the shadow at its most literal. The shadow here is not metaphorical. It is a fanged, venom-injecting physical reality. And the cure is not a counter-force. It is a mirror. Look at what is killing you. See it clearly. Let the seeing do its work. There is no antidote in the conventional sense. There is only the radical act of perception. Of all the miracles in the desert, this one asks the most of the human will, not to move a mountain or part a sea, but simply to turn your head and look at the truth. 40 years. A lifetime of walking in circles until the circles became a straight line to the future. The old generation is gone. Their bones are part of the desert now, a silent foundation for the children who never knew the taste of Nile water. Moses stands on the peak of Pisgah. He is the professional scriptwriter who has reached the final page. He sees the promised land, a cinematic pan of green hills and flowing milk. It is the solution he worked for, but he is the sacrifice that makes it possible. In our dark finale, we understand that Moses didn't fail to enter. He transcended the need to enter. He had become the law himself. He was no longer a man. He was a text. He dies in the kiss of God, a lonely, noir figure disappearing into the light of a sunset that belongs to someone else. The documentary ends not with a victory march, but with a lingering shot of the empty desert. The people move forward, leaving the man who saved them behind in the rocks. This is the final accoglimento, the realization that we all stand on the shoulders of giants who died in the dark so we could walk in the light. The mask is off. The shadow is integrated. The script is finished. We reach the final noir scene of the journey, Mount Nebo. Moses is an old man now, his eyes still bright, but his body a map of 1,000 miles of dust. He stands at the edge of the world, looking across the Jordan River at the Promised Land. The sun is setting, a Billy Wilder-esque silhouette against the orange sky. And here is the ultimate existential sucker punch. He cannot enter. He spent 80 years of his life for a destination he will never touch. This is the price of seeing through everything. He was the bridge, and a bridge is something that people walk over to get to the other side. Once the crossing is done, the bridge is left behind. He is the architect of a home he will never inhabit. He looks at the green valleys of Canaan and then turns back to the gray stones of the mountain. There is no bitterness, only a profound, weary accoglimento. He has fulfilled his function. He has integrated his shadow. He has moved his people from the order of the whip to the order of the word. Moses dies alone. No monument, no pyramid, no golden mask, just a man being reclaimed by the earth of a foreign land. He is the ultimate stranger. His grave is unknown because his identity was never about a place. It was about the movement from the self to the eternal. As the screen fades to black, the audience is left with the haunting realization: the Egypt we flee is always behind us, but the freedom we seek is always just over the next ridge, waiting for someone else to arrive. There is a final irony in Moses' exclusion from Canaan that the dark documentary must sit with uncomfortably, without resolution. The text tells us he was excluded because he struck the rock at Meribah instead of speaking to it. He was told to speak. He struck. A small act, seemingly. A moment of rage or exhaustion or grief after a lifetime of impossible faithfulness. And for that one strike, he does not enter. The punishment seems disproportionate only if you see Moses as an ordinary man. But Moses was not ordinary. He was the carrier of a new grammar of leadership. He was demonstrating, to a people who had only ever known leadership by force, that the new way was different, that the new way spoke before it struck, that the new way trusted the word over the rod. And in that one moment at the rock, Moses slipped back into the old grammar, into the language of Egypt, into the reflex of a man who was trained in the courts of the most powerful empire on earth to solve problems with force, and the infinite, who was building something that would outlast every empire, could not allow even Moses to smuggle Egypt into Canaan. The Promised Land had to begin with a generation that had no memory of the whip. And Moses, despite everything, despite his 80 years of transformation, still had the whip in his arm. It came out one last time at a rock in the desert and the door closed. This is not a story of divine cruelty. It is a story of the profound seriousness with which the infinite took the project of human freedom. Nothing of Egypt could be allowed to enter, not even Moses, especially Moses, because Moses more than anyone would have made it work. And the point was not for Egypt to work in a new location. The point was for Egypt to end. Leaving Egypt was a physical act, but the Egyptian structure lived on in the minds of the refugees. In psychology, we call this the internalized oppressor. Even though the chariots were at the bottom of the sea, the Hebrews still woke up in the middle of the night smelling the phantom smoke of the brick kilns. Every time a problem arose, a lack of water, a bitter taste in a spring, they didn't react like free people. They reacted like broken tools. They shouted for a master. This is the noir tragedy of the human condition. We hate our chains, but we fear the open sky even more. The desert became a giant mirror reflecting their lack of self. Moses had to watch as the people he loved begged to go back to the safety of their graves. This is the accoglimento welcoming of this documentary, acknowledging that healing is often more painful than the wound itself. The dark reality is that a generation born in a cage cannot understand the horizon. They saw the manna not as a miracle, but as a lack of variety. They saw the cloud of fire not as a guide, but as a reminder of how lost they truly were. If the pyramids were monuments to the self of the pharaoh, The tabernacle in the desert was the anti-monument. It was a tent. It was mobile. It was made of skins and gold, but it had no permanent foundation. It was the architecture of the nomad. This is the ultimate Heideggerian shift. God no longer lived in a stone temple at the center of a city. He lived in a tent in the middle of a wandering crowd. It was the sanctification of the journey, but for the people, this was terrifying. They wanted the setup of the Egyptian temples, massive, cold, and predictable. The tabernacle was a reminder that their lives were now based on a punchline they couldn't see. Inside the Holy of Holies, there was no statue, no idol, only a box containing a law. In the dark style of our narrative, this is the death of the image. The Hebrews were being forced to move from seeing to listening, and in a world addicted to the visual, just like our modern world, that transition is a form of sensory deprivation that feels like death. The tabernacle also speaks to a different philosophy of the sacred. Egypt built its sacred spaces to impress, to intimidate, to remind the worshiper of their own smallness before the grandeur of the divine. The columns of Karnak were designed to make a man feel like an insect. The tabernacle was designed to be carried. It was designed to move when the people moved, to be present wherever the journey led, to be portable enough for a nomad and intimate enough for a tent. This is a radically different theology of space. The sacred is not a monument you travel to. The sacred is a presence you carry with you. The divine does not live at a fixed address. The divine travels with the wanderer. And the wanderer, in turn, is responsible for maintaining the sacred space wherever they are, not by building something permanent, but by doing something intentional. This shift, from monument to movement, from temple to tent, is one of the most profound philosophical transitions in the history of human civilization. And it happened in the middle of a desert, among a group of traumatized refugees, led by a stuttering shepherd who was afraid of his own calling. As the screen truly fades, we are left not with answers, but with the weight of the questions Moses carried. What does it mean to be called to something larger than yourself? What do you do when the people you are liberating become your greatest obstacle? How do you lead when the destination keeps retreating and the followers keep regressing? How do you carry the infinite in a body made of dust? Moses never fully answered these questions. He lived them. He carried them up mountains and down into valleys and across seas and through 40 years of desert silence. He carried them to the peak of Nebo and left them there, in the wind, for every generation after him to find and carry in their own way. The questions are the inheritance. The wrestling is the blessing. The desert is the classroom. And the promised land, whatever form it takes in your own life, is always on the other side of the river you are afraid to cross. Moses crossed every river except the last one. He stood on the bank and showed us the other side. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.